Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What you are about to hear was kept inside one family for almost 80 years. Not because they wanted to hide it, because they were told in no uncertain terms that speaking about it would cost them everything they had. Their land, their name, possibly their lives. Only now, with the last of that generation gone, has the family finally agreed to let this story be told in full, using letters, recorded conversations, and documents that have sat locked in a strongbox since the summer of 1947. His name was Walter. He was 34 years old, a rancher working land in Lincoln County, New Mexico, when a violent storm rolled through the high desert on the night of July the 2nd. Lightning split the sky for hours. The kind of storm old-timers in that region still talk about, because the thunder didn't sound right. It didn't roll the way thunder should. It cracked, sharp and metallic, almost like something enormous had been struck rather than something atmospheric occurring naturally. The next morning, Walter rode out on horseback to check on a section of fence that ran along the northern edge of his grazing land. That was routine. Storms like that one tore up fencing constantly, and a rancher who didn't check his lines by sunrise risked losing cattle to open range. What he found instead of a broken fence was a debris field that stretched, by his own later estimate, nearly 3/4 of a mile. He described it to his wife that same evening, and she wrote his words down almost exactly, because even then, something told her this needed to be remembered precisely. He said the wreckage didn't look like any aircraft he had ever seen pictures of. It wasn't aluminum, and it wasn't steel. He said some of it looked like foil, thin as a cigarette wrapper, but when he tried to crumple a piece in his hand, it sprang back into its original shape without a single crease. He said there were also small beams, no thicker than a pencil, with symbols etched along their length that resembled no alphabet he recognized. Not English, not Spanish, nothing he could place. Walter gathered a handful of the smaller pieces and rode back to the ranch house. He intended to show his neighbors, maybe report it to the sheriff's office, treat it the way any responsible landowner would treat unusual debris on his property. What happened over the following 72 hours changed the course of his entire family's life. By early afternoon the following day, military vehicles were already moving through the county roads, not local law enforcement. Army personnel in numbers Walter had never seen in that part of New Mexico, not even during the war years. They arrived at his ranch directly, which meant someone somewhere already knew exactly where to go. Walter always believed the debris field had been under some kind of observation before he even found it, and that his discovery simply forced their hand. The officers who came to his door were polite, according to his account, almost unnervingly so. They asked to see whatever he had collected. He showed them the pieces from the kitchen table. He said one of the younger officers actually went pale looking at the foil-like material and quickly stepped back from the table as though it might be dangerous to stand too close to it. They asked Walter to take them to the crash site. He did. According to what he told his wife, the operation that followed lasted through the night. Trucks came and went. Floodlights were set up across the property. Soldiers combed the debris field on foot in careful, methodical lines, collecting even the smallest fragments, sometimes using tongs rather than their bare hands. Walter said he watched from a distance because he was told firmly to stay back before the soldiers left his land for good. An officer who Walter believed held significant rank sat him down inside his own home. What was said in that conversation became the defining moment not just of Walter's life, but of 3 generations that followed him. Walter was told, in language his family has always described as measured, but unmistakably threatening, that what he had seen on his property did not exist. He was told that nothing had crashed. He was told that if he, his wife, or anyone in his family ever spoke publicly about what they witnessed, the consequences would extend beyond himself. His grazing permits could be revoked. His cattle operation could be shut down through regulatory means that would be, in the officer's words, difficult to trace back to any single decision. And more than that, Walter was told plainly that men who talked in situations like this one sometimes disappeared quietly, and their families were left with nothing but questions no one would ever answer for them. Walter signed a document that night. His family does not have a copy of it. He was not allowed to keep one, but he described its contents to his wife as a binding agreement of silence, worded in a way that made clear the government considered it a matter of national security and that Walter's cooperation was not a request. For the rest of his life, Walter kept that promise publicly. He never gave an interview. He never wrote a memoir. When neighbors occasionally brought up the stories that later spread about strange happenings near Roswell that same summer, Walter would simply change the subject or leave the room. Those who knew him well said his temperament changed permanently after that week in July. He became a quieter man, more careful with his words, more watchful of strangers who came onto his land. But within his own family, the story lived on, passed down carefully in whispers, always with the same warning attached. Walter's daughter, who was only a small child at the time of the crash, but old enough to remember the soldiers on the property, grew up hearing fragments of the story from her mother. She has said that even decades later. Her mother would lower her voice whenever the subject came up, glancing toward the windows as though someone might still be listening. It was Walter's granddaughter who ultimately became the keeper of the full account. She grew up on stories that felt, to her as a child, more like family folklore than history. It wasn't until she was an adult, going through her grandmother's belongings after her passing, that she found the strongbox. Inside were handwritten notes from that week in 1947, a small tin containing what she believes are two of the original fragments Walter kept hidden from the soldiers that night, and a series of letters exchanged between Walter and his wife whenever he traveled, in which he occasionally, cautiously, referenced what he called simply the incident. The two fragments are, according to the family, still in their possession. They have never been examined by an outside laboratory, largely out of fear, a fear that traces directly back to the warning given to Walter that night in 1947, a fear that somehow persisted across 3 generations, even as the world around the family changed entirely. The family describes one fragment as a small piece of the foil-like material and the other as a short length of the inscribed beam, broken cleanly at one end. What convinced Walter's granddaughter to finally come forward, after keeping this material private for years, was watching declassified government files slowly become public. Files that referenced unusual debris recoveries in that same region during that same summer, using cautious, bureaucratic language that never fully confirmed or denied what her family had known privately the entire time. She said reading those documents felt like watching the outside world catch up, decades late, to something her family had carried quietly since she was a little girl. She has chosen, even now, not to reveal the exact location of the ranch, out of respect for what remains of the property and the family members still living nearby. She has also chosen not to allow the fragments to be tested publicly, at least not yet, saying that her grandmother always believed doing so would invite the same kind of visit Walter received that night in 1947, and that some fears, once planted deeply enough in a family, simply never fully disappear no matter how much time has passed. What stays with anyone who hears this story is not simply the debris or the strange materials or even the presence of the military moving with such speed and certainty into a remote corner of New Mexico. It is the quiet, ordinary detail of a rancher, a man with no interest in fame or attention, forced into a lifetime of silence over something he never asked to find. It is the image of a family passing down a secret not as an exciting tale, but as a burden, something to be protected and feared in equal measure. Walter passed away in the early 1980s, having never once broken the silence he agreed to that night. His wife passed a decade later, holding the same careful discretion until the end. It was only his granddaughter, born long after the event itself, who finally decided that the fear that had shaped her family for so long no longer needed to control the next generation. She has said that she does not know, and will likely never know, exactly what crashed onto her grandfather's land that July. She does not claim to have definitive answers about origin or purpose or intent. What she does know with complete certainty is that whatever happened on that ranch was significant enough to bring an overwhelming, rapid, and highly organized government response into a remote stretch of desert within hours, and serious enough that a private citizen was made to understand, without ambiguity, that his silence was not optional. Somewhere in a drawer in a home in New Mexico, 2 small fragments remain, kept out of public view, wrapped the same way they have been for decades. And somewhere in that same family's memory, a warning given to a young rancher on a July night in 1947 still echoes, carried forward by people who were never there to witness it themselves, but who understood from a very young age exactly how seriously it needed to be taken. If you found the story compelling, take a moment to think about how many similar stories may still exist, locked away in strong boxes and family memories across the country, never spoken about publicly out of the same quiet fear that shaped Walter's life. Some of those stories may never surface. This one finally has.